Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics with your week 5 preview for the OUA season. Tom, we're getting in that territory now. We're pretty well at the halfway point of the season. I don't know how we got this far. I need to get us a hall sponsor. We have OUA football to talk about, but more important than all that, how the heck you doing, my friend?
The season is going by way too fast. I know we're getting all of this incredible football and it's awesome to talk about, but we can't be already halfway through. Feels like they just started.
It always works out that way. We're going to talk about these games. We have 5 great games on the slate, Western on the bye, some huge rivalry matchups. I don't think we have anything off the jump to get into. So let's dive into our first 1 o'clock game. Battle of Waterloo. The Laurier Golden Hawks taking their show down the street to take on the rival Waterloo Warriors. Tom, Waterloo's coming off the bye. Laurier's coming off a stellar victory at home where we saw Elgersma break out, like we saw last year in week 3 against my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins. And you were so quick to highlight that comparison. And the analogy, the comparison only goes that much further because week 4 of last season, I'm certain you know who they were playing, the Waterloo Warriors. So for Waterloo, they're having to watch Elgersma unleash all hell and then come into their barn. Just to bring you back to last year real quick, that week 3 matchup we talk about, he goes 31 for 36, 451 yards, 6 touchdowns. I forget where he did that or against who, but it doesn't matter. Week 5, though, he takes on Waterloo. He goes 20 for 27, 318 yards, 5 touchdowns. So if you're Waterloo, my goodness, you're hoping that history does not repeat itself. And we'll certainly talk about how Waterloo's been looking this year, but it's not looking too kind towards them. Tom, what are you making of this matchup?
One of those where we talked about Laurier coming alive and specifically Mr. Taylor Elgersma coming alive in week 3. It's not a great time right now for the Waterloo Warriors after struggling in their first few games, having to then go into the bye week, which is the best case scenario, and then go and play against the Laurier Golden Hawks right when they come off of a heater here. The only thing that could be going their way is with other teams, typically you get really up for a big game, a big rivalry like Laurier Western, and then you come back down for a team that you think you should be able to beat. And maybe there's that mentality piece there. I highly doubt it with the dudes that they have on that coaching staff and on that field. What I'm really looking to see here from this Waterloo Warrior team is how do you manage being down? Not just in your 0-3 right now, but I mean, this offense for Laurier is one of, if not the best in the entirety of the OUA. They're going to score. They're going to rack up some points. They're going to score. How are you going to respond to that? Are you going to, like we've seen in some other teams, Western being one of them as well, immediately abandon the run and try to get into the pass and try to really focus on some things? We haven't really seen that run game really do anything here. Nick Orr being the leading rusher for these Waterloo Warriors as the quarterback. So I'm interested to see how committed are they going to be to the run? Are they finally going to get Anthony Miller and Quentin Springer, who finished the last game against Ottawa with -2 yards? Are they finally going to get them on the road and on track to where they were last year? Are you going to be focusing on Nick Orr? But most importantly, how will you respond as a team when Laurier scores a touchdown and probably scores early? Will you fold? Will you abandon your game plan? Or will you have a solid confidence in yourselves to continue to try to drive the ball down the field the Warrior way?
Yeah, and of course, the Warrior way, as we've seen it, as you highlighted, starts with running the ball. And we finally saw that run game come alive going back to their game against Ottawa before their bye week. As you mentioned, Anthony Miller really started to get in gear. Quentin Springer, obviously, it's been a quiet year for both those guys. And I think that'll really speak to, I guess, where this team's at just philosophically on the year, right? We saw them open up the season with that really exciting game against U of T. It's kind of gone a little sideways and down from that moment. And of course, it's never that you throw in the white flag, but it's kind of looking the way we look at U of T and we look at York, where you say, well, what can you build? What do you develop in terms of trying to build the sort of whole of your program? And what was also interesting going back to that Ottawa game, though, is that we see Nick Orr come into the season. He's the guy, really impressive in that U of T game, looking like he's building off last year of being like hand the ball off and make some clutch throws to your guys like Bazaliga and Sukar and some of these cats. To now being like, no, actually, you know what? Make some plays with your feet. Let's take a few shots downfield. And I expect we'll still see that, but we did see a little Nolan Caban in there as well. And again, it's so funny when you compare teams, when in some cases, we see multiple quarterbacks. For multiple teams, you see multiple quarterbacks, it means different things. And again, for the Guelph Griffins, that's a whole other kettle of fish. What I'm interested to see for the Laurier side, you mentioned kind of you're coming off this game and, you take out this opponent in Western and just from the jump, like the emotions of all this, because regardless of from an X's and O's, a Jimmy's and Joe's standpoint of where these teams are at, I have to imagine for Laurier, you're still like, this is still a game you circle on your calendar. I mean, it's remarkable. And maybe this just speaks to when you're one of the top dogs and you have a great geographical rivalry. When you think about for Laurier, they've been circling games on their calendar since they came off the bye. That Guelph game circled. That Western game circled. Waterloo circled. They're running out of Sharpies over there. They're circling so many games on the calendar. And just to the and it's a team where, again, we saw them with the week 2 bye. We've talked about the way that can impact you. And for a team that's veteran, and not just from the physical standpoint, but how you deal with that on the mental, the long seasons they do. And again, with Coach Faulds, how he's prepped this team for Vanier Cup runs, even on years where they didn't even make the playoffs. So they're a team that's been preparing, that training the mental fortitude of deep playoff runs. But there's the mental aspect of dealing with a long season and dealing with injuries and coming back from injuries and close ball games and all these things. But then also those bulletin board games, everyone has, you talk about all the time, everyone has Western week, but they have Guelph week. They have Waterloo week. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, again, to spoil the pick, I don't think Laurier will be anything but excellent in this one. But I'm going to keep tabs on this as we go further down the line, because I'm sure, like yourself, I can think about some of my years at Guelph and my later years when we're making Yates Cups runs, we're having deep runs and all these things. And it becomes a grind. And even though you become a veteran and you're used to it, the pressure, the having that target on your back, it's an aspect of the game that I don't know if you really get used to it. You were on some teams that had, that were on those national championship trajectories, taking home in 2011 and going back to them in 2 other years. Where do you kind of is that something you prepare for? Or is that just something that you just have to just deal with in the moment?
I think it's absolutely something you have to deal with in the moment. If you start looking at things like, oh, we're the team to beat, or we're this, or we're that, you almost start losing track of how you got to where you are in the first place, where you just put your head down, you grinded. And it was one of those really cool things, especially being on that 2011 team and then being on that 2014 team. Obviously, we didn't win the Vanier in that 2014 team, but we did get there. And in 2012, it was different because we were the top dog. Everybody knew, hey, Kyle Quinlan's coming back. Hey, you guys are really good. But in 2011 and 2014, we had that kind of underdog mentality where you're grinding. It's a tough game every single week. And then you poke your head up. And for me in particular, it was like, oh, we're in the Yates Cup. There's only 2 other teams in the OUA who are practicing right now. We're in the Yates Cup. And then grind away. And then you start winning a championship. You're hoisting a trophy and you're like, oh, now that I won Ontario, there's only our team and 3 others that are still practicing right now and it starts getting into your head that way. But once again, the solution to that, put your head down, keep grinding how you got there in the first place. I think that's very much what Laurier is looking to do here. I reached out to Taylor Elgersma after the win and just said, hey, congratulations on the big win, happy for you and everything. And he said, thank you. It's a great win, but it's just another game in the books. We've got to keep going. We've got to get better. We've got to keep, and without like any kind of prompting, it was just like, hey, congratulations. Yeah, thank you. That's just one of the books. We've got to keep going. So the dude's locked in. I don't think you can be any more locked in than that. And I think they've got the right mentality. And certainly, if anybody is going to know about being locked in and preparing for a big game, regardless of who they're playing against, it's Coach Michael Faulds. The dude played in a few of those big games himself. So I think that walking into this game, you can, if you're Laurier, you continue to build on the things that you've already been doing really well. I think you know that you've got a stud in Taylor Elgersma. I would love to see them start to really try to develop the screen game. We saw that a lot against Guelph, where you're getting the ball out to Raiden Thorne, you're getting the ball out to Ethan Jordan, and certainly in that Western game, the 72-yard touchdown, the second one of the game to Ethan Jordan, was a screen like that. And to focus on that, to really be great at those screens, that means your receivers are blocking. And if your receivers can consistently block downfield, you're turning 5, 10, 15-yard gains into touchdowns consistently.
I mean, just put Leomi Ojitalayo in front of anybody there.
Let's
and he will
go.
run through that man. Now, Tom, you bring up Taylor Elgersma, and rightfully so, obviously, the things he's been doing through his career and, winning the MVP last year. And just, we talked to him after the MAC game, and, it's kind of like the exact same thing. This guy is, again, I kind of said the same thing about Keegan Hall. It's like he's built in the lab, right? He just knows the stuff to say, when to say it, and he goes out there and he does his job. Now, the folks at Laurier aren't going to like me bringing this up, but especially after what we saw from our king, Charles Asselin, bit banged up, falling off a little bit. You look at Ottawa's schedule, and obviously we'll talk about them. They're playing some football this weekend as well. That sleeper OUA MVP pick for Asselin, it's going to be like, that was a sleeper to thinking that, again, Jared Kasari going into this year was the guy that I was thinking had the best shot, right? And now we're seeing him not play games. I say all this to say, especially since Elgersma beat Evan Hillock head-to-head last week, that as of right now, we're at the midway point of the season. If things stay relatively the same, give or take, whatever, a drop off, maybe a little bit when they go against the Queens defense, it's really stellar, or that Ottawa passing defense, but stays in the same ballpark. It's fair to say right now, Taylor Elgersma has to be in the lead if you were going to say OUA MVP. Again, I thought Kasari had a great shot at it, and I thought if he stayed in, before he started getting banged up, it looked like he could have been the guy. Which would mean, of course, Tom, that Taylor Elgersma has the opportunity to win back-to-back OUA MVPs. Tom, we haven't done this type of a segment since we had our good friend Nate Hobbs on the podcast, but with no preparation, I'm going to throw your way. Can you name for me the last back-to-back OUA MVP?
I think I do actually know this one.
Oh, got it. Come on.
I think it's Dylan Campbell.
Oh, did I screw up here? Wait. No, sir. Dylan Campbell
It's
only
not.
with the one in 2014. So, do you want to take another guess? You want another shot at it? You're off by about 10 years.
10 years. Wow. If I'm off by 10 years, then it would be Jesse Lumsden.
Oh my goodness. Didn't go back to back. So quickly, a few funny notes around the names you mentioned. So Dylan Campbell, 2014 MVP, run the ball for Laurier. He's bookended by Will Finch winning in 2013 and Will Finch winning in 2015. So, if you're not familiar with the name Will Finch, you haven't been following OUA football very long. He was a hell of a football player. Unfortunately, he ran into a couple Guelph Griffins during his time that gave him a few headaches. You mentioned Jesse Lumsden. He won in 04, in 03 and 02. The OUA MVP was none other than Queens quarterback Tommy Dennison, slinging the ball there for the Golden Gales. So Taylor has the opportunity, and again, I'm sure the folks at Laurier, they're either loving this or going, Bader, shut up, man. Has the opportunity to win back-to-back OUA MVPs for the first time in 20 years, and obviously there have been outstanding players during that time. But it's such a feat to get to. I mean, you've had OUA MVPs that have been on your team. We've gone against them. Obviously, looking at some of these guys like with Trey Ford, who won the Heck Crichton, guys in the mix here who've gone on to Supreme. CFL years. This is the creme de la creme. And what an achievement it would be for him. Of course, he doesn't give a darn about that, or at least he wouldn't say, because it's about the wins. And, going back to Waterloo, or sorry, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to speak on that. I know I just kind of set that up and just kind of pulled the rug out from under you. 20 years since an OUA MVP goes back to back. Pretty nuts.
Yeah, that's crazy. The reason why I thought Dylan Campbell, I thought I got my facts mixed up, is not Dylan Campbell was an unbelievable running back, but it was more so that in that 2014 year when he won OUA MVP as a running back, yeah, he did that on a broken foot. So that's what alarm bells rang in my head thinking about that guy. And that's why I said that. But anyways, yeah, I think that when you look at any of that, when you look at all of the extra pieces, Coach P had a really great saying for things like that. The individual awards in football are like a square peg trying to fit in a circle hole. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make any sense because it's a team game. It's a team atmosphere. You don't do anything as good as Taylor Elgersma is. If he doesn't have blockers in front of them, he's not getting the ball out. If he doesn't have outstanding receivers to throw the ball to, he doesn't get the numbers that he has. So it's a team sport in every sense of the word. Now, obviously, Taylor is an unbelievable quarterback no matter what, but the individual records, the individual awards within the season don't mean squat unless you're hosting a trophy along with them. So I think that they're going to be very, very focused on that and solely that.
Most certainly. And last thing I'll say just about Waterloo, again, that piece on the progress over the product of just where they're at right now. We're now seeing, again, 4 weeks of action of Coach Kevin McNeil dialing up this defense. We keep drawing this parallel with him and your guy Foxy Noxie in terms of DC's old faces and new places, both with this tendency to be really aggressive. And we've seen now Knox with his York Lions be able to, more so in that Queens game, I, at your request, did not go and look at the Windsor York box score, but try to slow down what the other team does best. And again, much like Knox, McNeil calls an aggressive defense. And I'll just be interested if, similarly as we kind of saw with Knox against Queens, if McNeil goes into this being like, and again, I'm sure they don't say this out loud, and I have no insight into what they're thinking privately, but you know what? I don't think we're going to win this. It's a long shot for us to win this game, but I'm going to take something away of them. I'm going to go into this game and show them that I forced you into certain looks. And this is a Waterloo team that through their 4 games, their 3 games, hasn't really got to the quarterback yet all that effectively. Mm-hmm. We saw Laurier going back to that MAC game, and of course with Scott Brady's defense, also those exotic blitz packages and some of the guys in there, they can get after you, but they got after Taylor Elgersma. Guelph, I think, got to him a couple times. Western, and again, it's Laurier O-line with guys like Cooper Hamilton and the like. I'll be interested to see how aggressive he comes, because I think if they just try and sit in a base, Elgersma is going to pick them apart. Hey, look, you might not win the war, but prove out there that they're what it is that you do great. Get back to the run game offensively, make us, believe that that's what you do, Nick, or, that dual threat that you can be at times, and defensively, really show us what your identity is, defense on that side of the ball. Because I don't think we've seen that yet. Tom, I'm certainly ready for a pick. What else you got on this one?
No, I think you really covered it really well. I think that when you're walking into this game, you have to understand for Waterloo, no matter what, this is a rivalry game. They're going to try everything they possibly can to knock off the number 1 team in the nation. But I really, really love for them to get back to basics and get back to the things that they're really good at. I think we certainly saw the biggest evidence of what this Waterloo team is really good at against that Toronto team in the week 1, and haven't really seen anything since then. Not since then, but haven't seen the same level since then. And I would love to see them get back to that. They're coming off the bye week. They're as fresh as you possibly can be halfway through the season. I'd love to see them really establish themselves and establish the things that they want to do here. Get after the quarterback, get that run game going, take a little bit of heat off of Nick Orr, and let him just sit back there and sling the rock. That's what I would really love to see from this squad.
But Laurier is winning this game, yes?
Yeah, Laurier is going to take this one.
On to our next game. Also at 1 o'clock from Varsity Stadium, it is the Red and Blue Bowl, the Battle of Toronto, the Argo Cup, the Matt Deans Bowl. Trademark Dakota Vine Industries. It's York, it's Toronto. Again, two teams that are very much, oh, as Tom rubs his hands together, he's about to drop some knowledge on me. I'm very excited. I don't rarely get to be in the hot seat. I feel like I'm the one who slings the questions left, right, and center. So, Tom, this is a huge matchup for these clubs. It's bragging rights in the city. It's two teams that have new identities on almost all facets of the ball, trying to prove themselves. And we already alluded to that Waterloo Toronto game and talking about the Battle of Waterloo. What was so great of that game is seeing those two clubs just play their most honest form of football. You know, we just finished that last game talking about, all right, Waterloo, like, recognize you're going up against someone, a team in a different kind of stratosphere than you, if you will. So what are the things you want to do that are just going to say, hey, look, we're not going to, we might not win this game, but like, what are we going to prove on this one? For York and Toronto, you can go into this game and just play football. Obviously, there's things you're still going to game plan where we see we can take advantage of these aspects, or here's where they're weakest on these plays, so on and so forth. You obviously still game plan, but it's a much more straightforward plan of being like, look, we're in it to win it, and we put our best foot forward and just throw caution to the wind on this one. You certainly have at least something to throw my way, but whether it's that or anything else, what do you make of this one?
Well, first and foremost, if you don't have it up already, I'd love for you to pull up the York Windsor box score. This is the first time that Zach is seeing this, folks. So for those of you who do know, you're going to see Zach's genuine reaction when he sees the offensive output from the York Lions on this one.
So now, 29-0. Yeah.
How many first downs did York get, Zach?
They got 3 first downs.
How many total yards of offense?
41.
Yep, that's accurate. That is correct.
Tom, you found a team that rushed fewer yards than your McMaster Marauders.
Yeah, we damn right. You're damn right we did. Yeah. So Windsor's defense is real. Windsor's defense is legit. Yeah. I really, really wanted to see your reaction live in person when you saw that, because you and I have both been talking about this York team and that we see a ton of potential here. A ton. But I didn't, obviously we'd watched the game. We saw the game. I just didn't think the stats were like this. It's just, yeah. So that's all I really wanted to say for that. I can see you mulling away on it. So you keep mulling away. I want to bring up a couple of additional points here.
Yeah.
So we've seen both of these squads really try to find their identity here. Obviously, both of them have brand new coaching staffs. The York Lions have a lot of brand new players as well, including those transfers that are coming in, a brand new quarterback for both of these squads as well. I'm really looking to see them establish themselves, both of these squads, and establish who they are and establish what they're really doing here. I think that Toronto in particular has not really established the same level of offensive output since that Waterloo game. We've seen flashes of it once again. Chris Joseph is a phenom. He's fast as all heck. And I think Caleb O'Donoghue really has a very bright future in the league here, but we haven't seen the same level of output since that first game. I'd love for them to get back to form, and I'd love for them to really get back into what makes up these U of T varsity blues. Because once again, well, we've said it before, I'll say it a million times. The OU way in Canada football is better when Toronto football is better. I hope that both of these squads really come up and kind of really do their thing here, but I really am looking for that passing game in particular to really start coming off. Garrett Ellis for these U of T Blues has really turned into somebody of a stalwart, somebody that you can lean on, and I love that for this squad, and I want, obviously you need a run game to continue on. But in order for U of T to get to where they want to go, whether it's this season or for the next, that passing game has got to be more consistent. We know the capabilities of it. I just want to see it more consistent.
Definitely. And again, that's where this is an exciting game to really be able to see, like, and there are some similarities because of what we've seen Coach Knox defensively call up for his defense this year, with how I think we'll see Coach Kanich's plan and prep for Caleb O'Donoghue, because we've seen him go up against aggressive DCs and how he tries to get the ball in the Jake Oseen's and Chris Joseph's hands of the world. We saw obviously Scott Barnett start last week against Carleton. He gets hurt pretty early in the game. Caleb O'Donoghue goes back in. And again, whether that was how it would have worked out one way or the other, and hopefully Scott Barnett's is better just for the sake of just hoping he's better. Um, it's U of T offense. Just looking, when you look by the numbers in terms of like the total offense and everything like that, they're not they're both these clubs. They're on the bottom half, bottom third. But you look at Caleb, he's fifth in yards per game. You look at you mentioned Garrett Ellis, seventh in yards per game. And of course, 11 teams and some teams have multiple rushers that end up ahead of them. And then we talk about Jake Osteen, we talk about Chris Joseph. Like again, this is a team where we saw when that offense in week 1 under a new coordinator was able to kind of open up a multitude of aspects, not really have to worry too much about how the opposing defense was going to just shut them down just completely. Nothing against the Waterloo defense, but it's obviously different from when they play Guelph, when they play Carltons of the world. I think this U of T offense is going to put up some points on this one. And again, your guy Knox, he's gonna get his on this one. He's gonna make some, put his guys in position to make plays. I don't know. I'm intrigued to see how this plays out, and I'm gonna be there live and with a couple, hopefully a lot of guys. It's a Football Ontario sponsoring the game, allowing football coaches in the city of Toronto to bring your players out. And I'll certainly be there with a bunch of our players looking to connect with other players in the city. It just is a great day celebration of Toronto football. I'm curious what you make of York offensively going into this one, because I think they're gonna have to play catch up. I think U of T might turn this into a bit of a track meet.
It's very rare that I ever go against a Greg Knox defense.
I thought you were going to say go against me.
No, it's very rare that I go against the Greg Knox defense, but I see where you're coming from certainly here. And I think the speed and the capabilities that this U of T offense brings, I really do think that they have the capabilities to do that. My big thing here is that I think coming out into this game, I don't think it's going to be an immediate track meet. I think that U of T is going to do some things, but that Greg Knox defense with York, and I do think a lot of these York Lions defensively, I think they're going to come up with some big stops. We need to see something out of this York Lion offense. We need to see it. We've seen them obviously struggle a little bit, try to get the rhythm going, try to get things going. But folks, I know Windsor is an unbelievable defense. I'm a big fan of Windsor first and foremost, but 41 yards of total offense? We know that this squad is so much better than that. They've got the talent, the capabilities that are there. We just saw last week. We just saw them do their thing. I want to see York. That this offense has to be better. We know that Matt Lynn is better than this. We know that Sean Law is better than this. We certainly know that Melkus Alunga, Alfred Olay, and all of the amazing receivers over there are unbelievable. So I just don't understand what's keeping them from really getting things going. And it's not just that they're going up against a great defense. We know that. And everybody's got a pretty good defense here if you're really looking at things. But what I really want to see is I want to see them find their identity a little bit more and be consistent into that. Find Avante McCoy more, find an Alfred Olay more, find these guys that are going to be your playmakers and get them the ball however you can. Obviously you want to be smart with the ball as best you can, but Matt Lynn in this one, 7 for 13, 57 yards and 1 interception. I want to see more consistency from this offense, most certainly here. I think that if they can put something together, if they can score a couple of points here, and now suddenly they have a bit of the lead, and Coach Knox is able to do his thing and send some pressure and send some blitzes and know, hey, you know what? If they catch us in something, we've still got some points ahead of them and we can play a little bit more aggressive. That is where Coach Knox does his best work. When he's got some room to play with and he can start sending some pressures, as you know very well, that's really where he can be as dangerous as possible here. So my big question mark here is this York Lions offense. If they can be consistent and just put together some yards and put together some points on the board, York has a bright future. But we've seen that defense starting to come along. We've certainly seen some bright points there. I have yet to really see a full game here where we've seen that York Lion offense do their thing.
Totally. And, you mentioned some of those some of those dudes on the offensive side of the ball for York. Alfred Olay doesn't really get involved in the passing game. And I remember him being banged up in the Ottawa game and in York's first game of the season. I didn't go back to rewatch the U of T York game. And of course, I didn't see the box score until just recently, but that stands out. And, like, however good you think Windsor's defense is, in a vacuum, how much better are they than Queens' defense? You give them that shot, but then you add in the fact that York was on the road against Queens' defense. They put up 380 yards of offense. They rushed the ball for 104 yards, almost 300 in the air. And maybe some of that is just when you're a young offense, some of those, and I don't remember how no, it was a beautiful weather weekend this past weekend, but you miss a ball here and there. All of a sudden, you always talk about that mentality of winning first downs, putting yourself into formidable situations where everything's open and you can do anything. Obviously, when you can run the ball, when you have a guy who can pick you up 4 or 5 yards on first down, that's huge. When you just miss a ball here and there, you're in 2nd and 10, 2nd and long, whatever it is. And, for U of T, they got a guy in Ryan Collins who's got after the quarterback a little bit. We've seen Kinsale Phillip do some great things defensively. He's 5th in the province right now in tackles. I mean, you don't love it when your DBs is up there. And for York, Brody Clark, one of their DBs is, I think, 3rd or tied for 3rd in tackles, which, again, you can kind of, can recontextualize that. But we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly from this York team. And I'm willing to give them that benefit of saying, well, hold on a second. You know what? Same thing. That's why I kind of think of that track meet mentality where they've loved using these screens that they use to their running backs, whether it's Malkus to Olay to Walker, Avante, getting their guys in space, a few shots over the middle, and you connect on a few more of those than you missed. And obviously they were missing in that Windsor game. They have the athletes to make plays. And again, neither of these defenses, though we have a ton of respect for both coordinators in Bob Mullen, in your guy, Greg Knox. Obviously, the reputation precedes Knox slightly more than Mullen from his history at Mac and whatnot. But these are opportunities for these teams to really unleash hell on offense. But obviously, I just think as a full rounded offense, when we saw those moments from York, yeah, they got past the 100-yard rushing mark. And that was awesome. But what Garrett Ellis has been doing, what Nyros, and obviously when you have a veteran there as well in
Stoikos,
I have more faith in that, more well-rounded of an offense, allowing you to then open up things like the play action. Caleb O'Donoghue's got some athleticism. I think that'll then play well and blend well off of being able to hopefully run the ball a little bit. I'm going to take U of T in this one. I'm going to take them at home, Tom. Again, I want to see points in this game. I think it's very doable, especially when you add in the fact that Alfred Olay, or our guy Cairo Berry, who's been a little quiet since we got to see him live from York, some dynamic players in the return game that I think could make some special plays on the day. But on the whole, I have more trust on what U of T is doing this year offensively. We've seen them go up against an aggressive defensive coordinator a few times over, and one time in particular, getting that first win of the season. And man, oh man, that would put U of T at 2-3, getting across the midway point of the season, and they would be tied with one of Mac and Carleton and possibly even Ottawa, depending on how their game goes, which just is, again, a snapshot from the midway point of the season. Those would all be teams that wouldn't be in the playoff picture, but it's a snapshot of just the ballpark you're in, some of those clubs. I think that's something you can hang your hat on. And obviously the season doesn't end there, but I'm going U of T at home, Battle of Toronto. Tom, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's a hell of a snapshot, but it ain't happening. The York Lions are taking this one.
Let's go.
I have total faith in Coach Knox. I think that defense is really going to have an answer for Caleb O'Donoghue, and I think that they're going to be able to limit him in some way, shape, or form. I'm expecting this York Lions offense to do something. I just need them to do a little something. Knox used to say, just get us a couple scores and we'll take care of the rest. All they really need is to just get them something of a lead and really just let Knox really go to town and unleash the dogs here. I think York is finally due for something here. I really think that despite this abysmal game on offense against Windsor. That Matt Lynn, Rex Walker, Melkus Alunga, and the entirety of that offense is better than what they showcased here. I'm going with York on the road.
Hey, you know what? I'd love to see it happen as well. You love this matchup because a Toronto team's picking up a win this weekend. So I'm fired up, man. I don't care if it comes at the cost of a little friendly fire at another Toronto team. Again, I'll be in the house there. If you're at this game, Battle of Toronto, Red and Blue Bowl, Argo Cup, Matt Dean's Bowl, come say what's up. Tom will be out in the woods somewhere camping away. We move from our 1 o'clock games to a 3 o'clock game. Another great matchup, traditional matchup, kind of like the Battle of Highway 6 at the 55 Bowl that when you look at some of the history of these two clubs, goes a little bit under the radar. It's Guelph at Queens taking on those Golden Gales live in Kingston, 3 p.m. start time. Tom, Guelph has been one of the best offenses in the province. Talked about how with U of T and how in this matchup with York, really excited to see what they can kind of do in all aspects of the game. For Queens, and unless you have some news for me right now, they're a very banged up offense who was really taken to task in terms of, a real Jekyll and Hyde 2 back-to-back weeks where they really trusted Vreeken to make plays. And boy, did he ever when they hosted York, but boy, did he ever kind of go the other way when they went on the road and took out Ottawa. As we talked about on the review podcast, when as a team, you can still put up 48 points. That's obviously awesome. 48 points when your quarterback's underperforming a little bit. And, not to rub salt in the wound of it, but as a reminder, Vreeken's 11 for 19, 128 in the air, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, 1 going back for a house call, as you so formidably worded it. So on the one hand, you have a great team you're playing with. That defense is stellar, all 3 levels. Your guy, Justin Pace, doing his thing in the middle, that front line that's, again, as we've talked about all season long, probably the best defensive line in the province. If I was more locked in with the other conferences, I'd be a little more bullish saying that they're the best defensive line in the nation, but I'd be hard pressed to imagine there's a better defensive line. But that quarterback position really needs to step it up a little bit. Guelph, that defense has been good, has been great at times. Not as consistent as that offense. This will be a huge test for them and for Guelph. Taking the show on the road, we'll see how they perform. What are you making of the Griffins taking on the Golden Gales?
We've talked about it a few times here, but my goodness, what a difference a year can make for Guelph going into this one. I mean, we talked about it against the Laurier matchup. It's the exact same team that played against Laurier that gave up 6 touchdowns to Mr. Taylor Elgersma and came down to special teams points in order to decide that game between the two of them. So I really, really am impressed with this Guelph squad here. And, you and I have obviously had a chance to watch them live and in person last week at the 55 Bowl to really see them do their thing. And I am really, really impressed with this squad. Queens, they showcase a great ability to play as a team and to score points as a team. But once again, the passing game here just doesn't make any sense to me. Alex Vreeken is much better than what he's showing so far in this year. He's 56 of 93 for 60% completion, 758 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. 8 interceptions is the most out of anybody in the OUA here. So certainly not playing to his capabilities and not playing to how we expect him to play. But once again, he was injured for the majority of last year. He came back in for the playoffs a little bit. And now it's a new offensive coordinator. Coach Nez is now at the helm here instead of Coach Flax. And there's a lot of things I'm sure to learn with, hopefully a lot of things that are staying the same. But it's going to be a difficult time to really try and get that passing game to where it should be. I think this Guelph Griffin defense is much improved than what they previously were, certainly from last year. And most definitely our guy in Anthony Moore, Tuzo, is going to be a ball hawk like he has been before. So I am worried about this Queens passing game. If they don't have Jared Katsari once again, now certainly Jaden Gusry McDonald was doing a great job last week. 18 attempts for 88 yards and 1 touchdown. That's nothing to sneeze at. But Derek Kasari was your favorite as an OUA MVP for a certain reason here. So if you don't have Kasari, if you're still missing some of those big boys up front as well, you don't have those starters, this is going to be a hell of a week. And certainly, I'm not sure, and you can certainly speak to this as a player yourself. I only had a brief experience with it with the Guelph Queens rivalry that really kicked off because of the Cheyenne connection there. The official word going into this was nobody fires my daddy and gets away with it. So that's the mentality going into this one. So the boys were all fired up, including the head coach, and most especially the head coach. But I'm interested from your standpoint, before you get into what you think of the game, what was the rivalry like between Guelph and Queens when you were there?
Well, and we've talked about this game a lot, and we were talking about it with Bill Brown, but I think one of the best football games of the last 15 years that maybe people are talking about it, but if you and I aren't talking about it that much, then people who talk OUA football probably aren't talking about it, because there are that many people talking OUA football. Is the 2012, I'm trying to remember if it was the quarterfinal or the semifinal. We're hosting Queens.
No, yes, semifinal, because we played against Western.
Right. And then that led into that Yates Cup. I can't remember who won that game, but it doesn't matter in the slightest. Of course, you guys won that one, where I should have pulled up the box score on it, where we is generous on my part, because I was very thoroughly still scout team there, but put together like a 20+ point comeback in the fourth quarter, take into overtime. Michael Bossman Fortino, Tino as they called him, Bossman, with the game-winning touchdown. It's the game that Stu Lang, of course, a Queens alumni himself, still, to my understanding, considers one of his favorite games of all time. The 2014 game where we go to their house and look to, continue on our track to an almost perfect season, and that rat bastard Nate Hobbs ruins the day with an almost OUA record-setting touchdown he got in that one. And yeah, you know what? I just think we had some really good matchups, none more than that 2012 game. In 2013, I think we ended up playing them twice, once in the regular season, once in the playoffs. So we played them a lot during that time. The Stu Lang of it all, I think, was big. And then, yeah, that was only then made, those embers were then relit towards the end of the decade with the whole Cheyenne piece of it there. So again, it was, Queens is a team where it's such a traditional team. We talked about how the win last week against Ottawa was the 500th career program victory. So it's just a team that, again, you get up for. Everyone wants to beat Queens, Queens. So there's a bit of that, holier than thou-ness to the Golden Gales. Love my Golden Gales. Love Nez. Love all the things they're doing there. Love Coach Schneider and everything like that. But yeah, I think you get up for Queens for sure. They're definitely they're a historic program. And again, we had some good battles. Were you doing a little bit of Googling over there?
I was trying to, but the box score on both OUA.ca and Guelph Griffins is not available for that playoff game, which is a travesty, because that is the best non-Yates Cup OUA football game of all time. The comeback that you guys had in that one, the final score is 42-39, and some major players, obviously the Lindsay brothers for you guys. You got the primetime Billy McPhee over on the Queens Golden Gales side of things. Those are unbelievable squads going at it. If it's out there anywhere, you have to watch that game, because it's one of the best ever.
Well, and I don't want to talk about this too much, because I know we've talked about wanting to do a deep dive on this, and we talked to some folks when we were in Guelph last week about putting that together. But for reasons I won't get into, but in the not too distant past, I was going through, I think it was either 2012 or 2013 Queens roster, and you mentioned Billy McPhee. That was such a stacked roster they had. Those were some incredible teams. That offensive line, Ryan Gramberg, right, as running the ball, that outside zone game that they ran so effectively. That, you know what, I became a good outside zone runner when I actually started in Guelph 2 years later, because I ran it for our scout team so many times. That first step was money. And of course, Billy McPhee, all the weapons he had, Doug Corby, older brother of Will Corby, and defensively, we haven't even gotten into defense. But again, we're talking about this 2024 version of this club, and Guelph. And you mentioned how we've talked about the fact that it's the same Guelph team as last year, and that was such an interesting point of to bring up in the context of the Laurier game. This is a team in Queens last year coming into Guelph where last year bit of an odd year for them because of how banged up they were at the quarterback position. Still, it was Russell Weir in at the quarterbacking for them, but Jared Kasari picks up 181 on the ground, 183 on the ground, 31 carries in classic Queens 2023 fashion. Anthony Souls the one getting the touchdowns. But I think that was a really strong performance by Guelph. Again, a tough year for them where they end up they were 3-4 at that time, but they really put together a gutty performance against them. And, it's so weird, again, thinking about last year where Guelph loses to Waterloo last year. And obviously Waterloo's lost some pretty key players from that team last year. Then who they have here, just turn on an Argos game if you want validation of that. His name's Tyson Hergott. He's pretty good at football. To kind of see those teams going opposite directions in 1 year apart. But for this team, for Guelph, that is, we see how effective they are in all these different aspects of the ball. We're seeing this running attack really start to take shape. It's been a bit banged up at times. This offensive line they have that's been so consistent. Really want to see if Isaiah Smith can take off. And we'll see again how Queens decides to play defensively, how Coach McManus wants to try to attack them. Because on the one hand, maybe you can play them a little straight up and say, hey, look, we trust our front seven with Hubert, with Newell, with Van Wisher, with Pace Patrol in the middle to be able to say, all right, contain that run game and let our guys in the back end go to work. Because that's the thing for me. Right now, I'm Guelph's obviously playing terrific football. Queens last week gave us some pause offensively. The rest of the team's looking really mighty. But Aboud had a great game last week. It's still a defense where with the secondary, kind of the same way when you go up to play the Ottawa GGs, where you see Miller Melanson that back end of the defense. You see Vanek in the back end of that defense. And it makes you worried. And so again, I'm curious to see how Queens wants to prepare for this Guelph team. I have to imagine you'd still rather put the ball in Aboud's hands to beat you than say, okay, hand the ball off to Malloy and Smith and Sargent and whomever else and let McCray run wild. I think that's still how you have to be when you have some great guys in coverage and say, okay, hey, look, if anyone's going to beat us, it'll be Tristan Aboud slinging it out to his guys. I think he's shown he can do that. And he was actually a bit handicapped last week, being short some of his receivers. I think if you're McManus and Queens, that's your gamble on this one. Make Tristan Aboud beat you and see if you can turn him over, give your offense opportunities to keep up with that Guelph offense. And, maybe maybe Ian St. Arnaud pulls another rabbit out of the hat on this one.
I mean, certainly he's done it 3 times now. It's a very strong possibility that this young man could do it. But I agree with you in this regard. I think that based off of what we see, I'm not exactly saying that, oh, yeah, we're going to put the ball into Aboud's hands and force him to beat us and we're going to be okay, because the dude has been slinging the rock, especially though over the past couple of weeks here, and has gotten considerably better and better, certainly with his targets on certain receivers that he's had, like you and I have seen. But I think it was last pod I alluded to the idea that Queens potentially could have 6 all-stars on that defense, and they're everybody that you just mentioned: Asher Miller Melanson, Keegan Vanek, Justin Pace, Silas Hubert, Darian Newell, Van Wishart. Very realistic that all 6 of them, either in a first or second team capacity, will be all-stars. This is a very good Queens defense, and certainly one that is used to seeing an outstanding rushing attack every day in practice when Jared Kasari is healthy. So it's not like this is going to be something that's new. Now, the one thing that will be different is the fact that there's going to be multiple people who have the capabilities to run the ball here. We talked about it a little bit. I think I was the one to actually bring this up, and I'm going to say it on the pod. They really put it out there. When you look at Isaiah Smith, when you look at Sargent, and when you look at Malloy, I think that those three backs are better than the Windsor trio because the explosiveness that they have, because the capabilities that are there, and the fact that we've seen Joey Zorn really do his thing in the slot. And I know you're mulling that over. I think all three of these guys are potent in the passing game, and I think they have the capabilities to really run the ball all over teams, certainly behind an outstanding offensive line here. So I'm really interested to see who wins that battle in the run game.
I know I love the take, and I was mulling it over, and I kind of had my Cheshire cat grin as I think I decided I'm in agreement with you. Because also we've seen how Guelph will just say, you know what, you don't like dealing with any individual one of them. Well, here's all three of them, right? Like, and of course you mentioned we've seen Joey Zorn get to split out into the slot a little bit. However you consider, Liam Talbot, how he gets involved in the run game. He's obviously another weapon who they'll hand the ball off onto a jet sweep and fake the handoff to Zorn and John and everything like that. But just that offense, and that we keep going back to it, that creativity.
Mm-hmm.
In the offense, which is no doubt, and of course under Coach Mark Soria, that's only becoming more and more complex as they're getting more used to his systems and they're getting more comfortable, starting to add and to tinker and all these things. And you talk about the rivalry. This is Coach Soria's homecoming as well. These are his old digs.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine that, we talk about the culture change, and it's so apparent. People at other schools are making the jokes for us now. When we were at Laurier, there was some great commentary about, what's going on at Guelph now. This is a team that wants to win for their guy. And I'm certain those Golden Gales are wanting the same things for their guy in Coach Nez and their guy in Coach Taggart.
Yeah.
Stellar on calling up the special teams. Shout out to you, Charlie Taggart. You've been spectacular this year and your special teams units. I'm sure they're thinking the same things, but just with everything we're seeing and getting to see Guelph live 3 times now, and you get that proximity, it's really something special that he's doing there with this club. Tom, again, Guelph defensively, hit or miss, and they've had to play some strong teams offensively. Obviously, we saw that Carleton team. We didn't quite know at the time that when they were going to put a backup in Elijah Barnes in, they were really just putting in another starting quarterback. We've seen how explosive that offense is. I can't wait to talk about them in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Obviously, dealing with Laurier, dealing with Keegan Hall. Teams have been able to move the ball on them, right? And that's expected, especially given how Guelph scoring points. The other teams are forced to move the ball and everything of that nature. I'll be really interested, especially if this Queens O-line's still banged up. And even if they're returning guys off the bench, right? So it's either guys who are in their second, maybe third starts, weren't going into the seasons being like, this is our starting O-line, or guys coming back from injury, where we look at the Brandon Farragos, the Coulter Woodmansies, Curtis Woodmansies, Joshua Campbell's, Brenton McDougall's, guys who really make noise on that front seven for them. Really be interested to see if this is a game where they can get that pass rush going. Because I feel like that's an area of this defense. You talk about how our guy Tuzo, is such a game wrecker. Loving what guys like Johnny Green did early in the season, seeing what Kyle Simon Guerin does for them in the return game and also in getting to turn the ball over. In that front seven, really be interested against a team that, again, if Queens has the run game back, first and foremost, can they slow them down? But against the banged up O-line, is this an opportunity for them to be able to make Freakin uncomfortable and really just show another side of this team we haven't seen yet, to make all the other teams, even a Laurier club who was able to seal the deal against this team at home, say like, darn, as fun as it would be to play them again, I really don't want to deal with them. As far as I can really think, aside from just getting that run game a little more consistent with Isaiah Smith back in the fold, if I'm really going to nitpick Guelph right now, it's saying that let's get that pass rush a little bit up to snuff. And I think this is an opportunity with a banged up Queens O-line, and especially if Kassar's not in there and Vreekin has to go into that 30 plus attempt category. This could be a special day for them on the defensive side.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because on the year so far, only 3 sacks for this Guelph Griffin defense here. And I think one of the biggest pieces that this team is really missing is a very consistent pass rush, and one guy in particular in one Scott Murray. I think when he
Oh
was on the
gosh.
field for them, that defense was just at another level because you could afford to be a little bit more aggressive in the passing game to really take away the quick routes because give Scott Murray 3 or 4 seconds, he's going to get there. At bare minimum, he's getting a hit. If not, he's certainly hurrying the quarterback, and obviously, best case, he's sacking him. There's a reason why he was an All-Canadian on that team, and I think that's something that they're really missing on this defense. So I'm really interested to see them get back to form a little bit, find their strengths, and find their ability to rush the passer. I know that in Coach Barry's defense, we've obviously seen scenarios where they swap out 4 or 5 different players on that defense when it's obvious passing downs. Maybe you bring a young guy in to really try to see if they can get after the quarterback here. Now, typically speaking, this is a very good Queens O-line. There's one thing that's been pretty consistent over the years at Queens. It's that O-line has been pretty solid for them. And I expect them to do that same thing once again, even if they've got a few guys that are injured. They've got the horses to really get their thing done. But I would love to see what Guelph can do. Looking at some of the stats here, something that I think is relatively interesting is so far on the year, Guelph Griffins have the number 2 rushing defense in the OUA. Now, that certainly looks good on paper. You can also think about, well, who have they played recently? Who's got a really strong run game recently, and add that into it, certainly. But I don't think you get that just by accident, for sure. I think that this is a team that really does their thing very well. We talked about our guy Tuzo.
Never gets old.
Any excuse to just say that name so I can do that is awesome. But I really love everything that we've seen from Curtis Woodmansey, from Josh Campbell. They seem to be back and doing their thing, and Woodmansey in a slimmed down, svelte defensive tackle stance. So he's really doing his thing as well. I really like actually defensive lineman Nick Parchenko. He doesn't quite have the speed to be a proper pass rush, but dude is strong as an ox. I've seen him fold in a couple of O linemen when watching him as well. So I like this defensive line. Obviously very high on these linebackers. Still wanting to see a little bit more in certain times from this Griffin defensive secondary here. I think they certainly have the capabilities, and I love everything that I've seen from Matt Barry, but it will be very interesting to see how can they do, because you look into this and you say, yeah, Alex Reekin has certainly not been playing his best football, but do not dare sleep on this young man because he will torch you if you do. So really interested to see how this defense stacks up against Queen's offense that has the capabilities to be very good, albeit very banged up right now.
Totally. And you know what's amazing? I pulled up some of the stats as well. And again, we obviously saw Kasari limited. When you look at Queens in terms of them rushing the ball, because right now, Guelph's sitting pretty at the top of that list right now. Because, you mentioned, okay, well, who have they gone up against? They started the season against Carleton. We've liked some of the things we've seen from Matthew Morin, but they're 7th in the league. You see them go against a U of T team. They're 9th in rushing. They see them go against McMaster. They're 10th. Laurier 6th, right? So Queens is the highest ranked running game the attack they'll have to go up against. But even them right now, only sitting at 5th with 169. They're even behind. Wait, I shouldn't say even behind. They're behind Ottawa, but we know King Charles Aslan's rushing the ball. It's the top 4 is who you'd think would be up there. Queens, obviously, though, a bit of a misnomer being that low, but nonetheless, this is the biggest individual. Again, we don't know Kasari's status, but for Queens, like again, just to as we're getting to this midpoint threshold of the season, we have Guelph right now at 3-1. We have Queens at 3-1, with teams like Laurier and Windsor and Western in the mix, as with Laurier and Windsor both undefeated. Western, wouldn't surprise anyone if they just win out, go 7-1, whether Laurier stays undefeated. Like you could have, I don't have the full schedule in front of me, but like, could you have an 8-0? You could have 3 teams maybe at 7-1 finishing up at the top. I think that works. Maybe that doesn't work. I don't know. It doesn't matter. So thinking about, okay, that last quarterfinal game, home game possibility. And not that Guelph and Queens still couldn't vie for that top of the food chain spot with some of these other clubs. But it's a game now as we're approaching the midpoint in the season. This matters. And if Kasari, again, it'll be an interesting decision to make, because from what you heard, when we found out he wasn't going and some of those O linemen weren't going, it you know it didn't just seem like a product of like, oh, the Ottawa game's in the bag, let's rest him. It seemed like, you know what, this injury actually might be pretty bad.
Mhm.
If he's ready to go, I think you send him out there because this is huge. This is a massive game to be able to again end up in that upper echelon, to be able to put yourself in that better of a position to have a home playoff game. We don't know his status, but frankly, Tom, even if he trots out there, give me Guelph on the road, baby. Come on now. It just sounds so good. It sounded good when I said it against Laurier. Let's say it again. Griffins roll into Richardson Stadium, pick up the win. That offense is just going to keep building all the things that Coach Ria is doing. I think that they can run the ball effectively enough to mitigate those monsters in the back end. And just with the ability to go north, south, east, west, who's got the ball, where's it going? I think they'll have that defense, that front seven on their toes enough that they can't just tee off, fire off the ball and just make plays as easily. I don't think it's going to be, I say all that, not saying that's going to, oh, Guelph's going to blow them out or anything like that. By no means, though. Hey, that'd be pretty cool. Guelph on the road. Hey, let's go, baby.
when we first started looking at this team in the preview, we started looking at Queens, and you and I are going back and forth about, hey, where do we think we should put them in our rankings? And we're thinking they've got the defense. Yeah, absolutely. They've got a solid receiving core. They obviously have a fantastic running game and solid O-line. If Alex Vreeking can stay healthy, this is a team that is really just a couple of steps away from being in that upper echelon to competing with the Lauriers and the Westerns of the world. I really truly believe that. And walking into this, I still think that. However, so is Guelph. Guelph's ready to be there too. Guelph's ready to get into there too. Give me the Griffins out on the road. I think that they're going to do enough here that they're really going to establish themselves as, hey, we hung in toe-to-toe with Laurier all throughout that entire game and lost it by a slim margin. We did our thing against McMaster, against a team that is better than what their record shows. This is a good Queens team that has a good record. We're going to see what we can really do here. And I've got two additional things to say onto this one. First off, my hot take for this one, because I've had a couple of hot takes. I don't think we just detailed how good that this Queens defense is and all of the players, and that they could very conceivably could have 6 all-stars. This Griffin O-line doesn't give up more than 1 sack in this game. I think they're that good. I think they limit Mr. number 99, Silas Hubert. I don't think that they get back to their quarterbacks here. And if they do, I think it's a design run that is maybe stopped behind the line. I don't think that they give up more than 1 clean quarterback sack into this one. I've got faith in that Griffin O-line. The second piece that I have coming up is actually a commenter question that we got in this one that I think would be perfect to talk about in the Guelph Griffins in this regard here. So I wanted to hit you with this with zero prep time, Zach. KCI Raiders Football, the Instagram account, who has been a very big supporter of us. And I apologize, I don't know who runs that account. I forgot to completely ask before I recorded this.
They're big Ryan Sheehan fans, if memory serves.
The big Ryan Sheehan fan asks 2 questions of us. In this year, defensively, there seems to be a lot of odd fronts on the defensive line, meaning that in typical fashion, wherever your field side is, you have a 3-tech, a defensive tackle in between the guard and the tackle, and a 1-tech, a guy between your center and your guard on the weak side to try to conform against what typically could happen. We're starting to see that flip. We've got a 1-tech there and a 3-tech on the other side. So he asks, why do we think that's happening? And secondly, there's a lot of teams out in the OUA right now that are using multiple quarterbacks. Do we think that these are by design or by necessity? I'll let you answer that however you like, my friend.
You know, I'll start in reverse order. The quarterback piece. I mean, obviously with Guelph, we were kind of poking fun at the fact they were using so many quarterbacks going back a few years, and I think that was a product of you had a lot of talent. You couldn't quite figure out who was the guy, and the team was so effective all around the board, and the expectations were so high that I can understand the pressure of saying, shoot, if this guy's not cutting it, let's go to the next guy. Let's go to the next guy. I think just the most optimistic, and to keep this conversation relatively truncated, point I'll say is I think we just have so much talent right now coming out of the OUA. Seeing redshirt freshmen in Caleb O'Donohue and Elijah Barnes stepping into the limelight and making plays. Seeing guys like Matt Lynn for the York Lions be able to have relative success in that environment. Seeing Nick Orr, seeing and sitting in front of a guy in Nolan Caban as well, who, again, whether you want to get just too caught up in the team success, who we've seen do some really great things, and that's without getting into the top dogs we've seen of the OUA. Like we talked last year, I think it was, about whether that recruiting class, I think it was all in the same recruiting class, but of Evan Hillock, Taylor Elgersma, I think Tristan Lefebvre was in that mix.
Keegan
Danny
Hall.
Skelton, Keegan Hall, thank you so much, was one of the best we'd ever seen. And again, those are now becoming, well, guys who are going to get their name called perhaps in, however many months' time, fingers crossed, in the CFL draft. And we're just refilling those coffers. So on the one hand, I think it's a product of having the talent. Two, and this probably plays into the odd front piece of that. And I love the comment because I don't think I've really picked up on that watching these games necessarily. But I think we're just getting, much in the same way we're getting more talent on the field, we're getting more talent off the field, and people willing to say, I keep going back to kind of using money ball as a verb, the sort of the money balling it out there, of saying for so long it felt like teams were trying to, Western's the team to beat. And you know what? They still are, right? They still are. If only by virtue of, you look at that coaching tree of Greg Marshall's, Coach Marshall's, and just see how far those roots expand in every which way with all these clubs. And I think for a while it was teams saying, all right, hey, look, it's just a beat 'em up, brawl 'em out matchup with the Western Mustangs. They're not going to pull any punches, or sorry, they're not going to pull any punches. They're not going to pull any secrets, anything like that. But even with them, we're now seeing with the veteran of all veteran coaches and Coach Gleason on the defensive end even change up his system, going to using that 30-man front, bringing different pressures and things like this. I think our game's just getting just way better. People are getting more comfortable. I don't even want to call it taking risks, but just saying, look, if we all try to play as Westerns played over the years, Power G football, 4-3 defense, and just say, hey, look, you got to beat us. Here's the playbook, but we're going to run it better than you. That's how you end up getting Western over and over and over again. So I think it's just, we're on all aspects, we're getting more talent. We're getting more people willing to take those risks to try things being different, because I think it's a recognition that being a little bit different is what accounts for it. I don't have too good insight on the odd front to speak on that. We're obviously seeing some incredible linebackers on so many of these teams, and so maybe that odd front where you're maybe giving a little more space to the front side of that defense, the strong side of defense. And when you say we have a star, whether it's an Ethan Grigorsich, a Justin Pace, a Max Nixon, Riley McLeod, like all these guys who are so good, Daniel Briere, where you can say, look, you have all this space to play with on the front side. We don't need a 3-tech there to clog up, to force them more directly in the middle. Guys who are not only able to stop the run, but then have the lateral quickness to get in space and chase down a runner. It might speak to that as well. But again, ultimately coming back to just the growth and evolution of the game on and off the field. End of speech.
Yeah, I love it. I think from the quarterback standpoint, and like you said, I don't want to take too long because I think we could easily make a podcast out of this.
I almost already did.
Yeah. I think for the most part, I agree with you in that there's so much new talent at that quarterback position here. And certainly when you look at a team like a Windsor, when you've got a guy like Danny Skelton, who is somebody that you've seen success with in the past, but you still feel very comfortable in last year going to a Nick Domofsky and now this year going to a Corson Roy in order to help you get that win. That certainly spells exactly what you're saying there. And I think for a lot of these other teams, Guelph excluded, I think in this one, there's injuries that come up. There's a next man up mentality that's really allowing certain players to kind of play and get into this. And there's a lot of teams who are trying to find their identity still. We've seen Matt Lynn and Caleb O'Donoghue really take the primary snaps here, but we've seen Sean Law and Scott Barnett come in certain situations to try to give a little bit of an extra look or to see if there's something else that's going to be working here because it's such an important position. And lastly, for the odd front here, the take that I will have is that I think, primarily speaking, that even the regular front where you've got a defensive tackle into the B gap that's called in between the guard and the tackle on the strong side of the field is to try to make sure that your linebackers are as free as possible, because if your linebackers are free, they have the capabilities to run around and make tackles where a defensive lineman maybe doesn't have the same speed or agility to chase down a running back. I think we've seen an influx in this year of of offensive coordinators who are seeing success running weak side. And in no better game or no better area did we showcase that with Laurier and Coach Galloway in a key situation in a fourth quarter.
Tanner flipping Nelms.
Put everybody, all of your receivers to the strong side of the field, leave your dog and Laomi Ochitolai on a one-on-one, run power G into the boundary and let Tanner Nelms get you the first down. That's bully football and something that just gets us both so fired up. But I think that's probably the best version of it, but I think we've seen other teams showcase that same capability. Maybe not necessarily running away from a quads front, but certainly you've got 3 receivers to the right and 2 to the left to the boundary. Well, let's run to the boundary. Let's see what we can get there. And in order to get away from that, you're now shifting your defensive lineman there so that you're forcing anybody else to come back inside into the teeth of that defense where your linebackers are staying. So that's kind of my take and some of the things that I've seen here, but fantastic question. And thank you so much, KCI Raider Football, for reaching out with that one.
Shout out to the high school coaches left, right, and center across the province, across the country. Y'all are the ones who are making these athletes make it to the next level so spectacular and making our game that much better as well. Tom, we still got 2 games to go through, so let's move on. We made picks, right? Did we make picks? Did we pick?
We're rolling with the Griffs.
We're going with the Griffs.
We're rolling with the Griffs.
Oh, give me Guelph on the road, baby. From my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins, to just your Marauders, Tom. Just your Marauders, Tom. They're hitting the road as well to take on the Carleton Ravens. Oh, God, I'm such an idiot. A 4:00 start from Carleton. And, talk about explosive offenses, because this is a game where, if I'm thinking with any, brain cells function in my head that York and U of T is a track meet, may I introduce you to the Ravens and the Marauders passing attacks. Both of these teams tout birds as their team mascots, and my, oh my, do these offenses fly. The metaphor is crashing and failing on me right now. We have Keegan Hall in one corner. We have Elijah Barnes in the other. We've obviously talked about the plethora of weapons that both these guys get it out to. Just on the Carleton front, I mean, when you go, or like with both these teams, like when you look at the league leaders as far as receivers, you have Tristan Reddy, again, a guy that was sort of part of that Kasim Ferdinand and friends piece of it all that, I obviously erroneously tagged it as, but, Kasim Ferdinand's pretty good. It made sense to think that, like, the guys who weren't named Kasim Ferdinand were kind of the others, but Tristan Reddy second right now in the province in yards. Kasim's in 5th. 3 touchdowns for Ferdinand. He's got some of the silkiest mitts out there. So secure when you put the ball up for him. For Mac, obviously, a guy like Nicholas Adair, third in the province right now. Jackson Taylor, Jackson Coolin, the Jackson 2, as you so eloquently tagged them. These all over the place, and both just offenses that, as I said, that just makes me just want to go back and study these tapes to be able to just be like, man, how do you make it look so easy? Where obviously it's like, well, when you got great quarterbacks like that, it's pretty helpful. But just being able to get the ball across the board, even a guy like a Ben Huckabone, right? A guy like Devontae Hudson, right? It just keeps going with these clubs. And then in the rushing attack too, we have Braden Kelly and Matthew Moore, and they're pretty well, a wash a piece in sort of the mid 70s rushing yards per game. Obviously Elijah Barnes adds a neat little element on the ground as well. For the Carleton Ravens. But man, we have an absolute battle of two air raid offenses doing battle from Carleton. Tom, what do you make of this one?
Well, going into this, you have to acknowledge the air raid offense that both of these squads have. I mean, when you look at the numbers so far this season, Keegan Hall, 100 completions on 139 attempts. That's in 4 games. 139 times he's thrown the ball in 4 games. That's both of those are first in the OUA. 71.9% completion percentage. 1,277 yards, that's first in the OUA. 319 yards, that's first in the OUA. It's an unbelievable statistic to kind of look at. And then you look over Elijah Barnes, 68 for 109. That's second in the OUA. Mac has thrown the ball 30 more times than the number 2 team in the OUA. And so you can see both of these squads really doing their thing. Interestingly enough, even despite that, all of the differences in how many completions and in how many attempts initially, both of them are tied at 5 touchdowns apiece in the air. So certainly Mac has relied on that passing attack, but hasn't gotten into the end zone as consistently here, or at least using the air raid as much into this season so far. But certainly when you're looking at both of these squads, you have to acknowledge the passing attack. I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. Keegan Hall is the real deal. I really truly believe that he is one of the top tier quarterbacks in the entirety of U Sports with how he's throwing, and not just the numbers that he has, but the mechanics. He's one of the best quarterbacks that naturally moves inside the pocket. And I think we've seen that really get better and better, especially going into this year where he's sidestepped a couple of guys and evaded them in the pocket, but hasn't broken out of it. We've seen capabilities, and certainly he has the legs to run, but where another quarterback may see some pressure and then just take off and run and try to make something with his legs, Keegan is very committed to staying in the pocket for as long as he can and to give his outstanding receivers the time to get open and to understand where they're going and where he is going to throw them the ball to get them open as well. So I really love everything that I've seen from this kid. Elijah Barnes being thrown into the fire here as soon as Tristan Lefebvre goes down with an injury, and being able to showcase an outstanding talent week after week after week against some of the top tier in the OUA. In the first 4 games of the season for Elijah Barnes, he's played against Guelph, Windsor, Western, and finally picks up a win against Toronto. Those are 3 of the best teams in the league, and you're playing them the first 3 weeks of the season. So some people may look at this, if you haven't been following college and Raven football, and think, guys, these are both 1-3 teams. What are we doing here? Why are you guys hyping them up so much? It's because both of these squads have certainly shown capabilities that they are much better than these records would indicate.
And it's the parallels just keep going deeper for these teams when you turn on the defensive side of the ball for these teams in terms of how they're giving up yards, where they're giving up yards, and even how they're taking the ball away. But I mean, for Carleton, and if we're going to start dividing where these two teams separate from one another, and I think as much as we're both so bullish on Elijah Barnes and just the passing attacks in general, you certainly have to, it's not even a question. Keegan Hall is the better quarterback in this matchup, though not to take away from Barnes. When you look though defensively, for Carleton, they have having 2 guys, one in Schneider Cave Phillip and Jacob Henderson, both with 2 interceptions. When you see for McMaster, guy in Yohan Shimbalanga, guy like Drake Bodie, being able to turn the ball over. But the thing that I want to throw your way, because this is where, and we saw Keegan take a bit of a beat last week after a bit of a hit, and he'll escape as well. His escapability, talk about how he moves in the pocket. He'll get out of the pocket as well and try and pick some yardage up with his feet. Again, I was saying it's not fair that he can also get out of the pocket and run the way he does at times. This Mac offensive line, Tom, against Ife Onyeka, if they're what are they averaging number of times they're attempting to throw the ball per game? Uh, what was the number for Mac? I'll let you pull that up. Like somewhere Ife Onyeka is looking at that number and just saying, I'm gonna get mine, man. Like how but maybe this is that thing where as Mac, you can commit more to be able to slow him down. You say, okay, you add in an extra fullback to be able to, or a tight end set or double tight end set if you have to, and say, well, we still have great guys on the outside. But again, as we start to then separate, we can go through all these similarities, which makes us so excited. We almost jumped into the preview of this game when we were breaking down the games from last week. And again, much like with Queens and with Guelph, when we talked about the significance of that one midway point of the season in terms of the standing, as you said, both these teams are at 1-3 right now, fighting to be able to have that last playoff spot in the OUA. When we start to separate these teams, though, seeing both these teams can turn the ball over. Carleton's done a bit of a better job so far this year, but in getting after the quarterback and a guy like Ife Onyeka, who really came on strong in that game against U of T, who, again, they don't have one of your top O-lines that you're going to say in the OUA, but neither does Mac. And the amount of times they throw the ball is going to be a big game for Onyeka. And if nothing else, if Mac can limit him, and we you kind of talked about that Guelph game as a must-win game for them to fall to 1-3, which of course is what happened. That's a big blow. And at this point, this is like, I'm not good enough at math, nor do I want to commit the time to figure out if this is truly mathematically a must-win for Mac. If nothing else, if they can slow down Onyeka in some capacity, that in itself is a huge win, because for all the things we've seen from these teams over the last little while, that is as big of a discrepancy I think you'll find when you go through this matchup.
That's most definitely the thing to be watching here. I mean, when you just tease itself up so much to look at, they're averaging just under 35 attempts in the air per game in 4 games. 35 attempts for Onyeka to get a sack, to get after Keegan. That's really what that boils down to. And now I'm positive that this McMaster team is going to start doing some things to really try to limit that, whether it's max protection or an additional running back on the edge, to do something like that, to just make sure that Onyeka has a little bit more to deal with here. The other thing that I love that you brought up that matchup, but the other side of things as well, still the team who leads the league in sacks is the McMaster Marauders with 9 in 4 games. So certainly they don't have a one like an Onyeka, who is an unbelievable athlete and should go, well, was drafted and should stick in the CFL next year. This is a good team defense that gets after the quarterback decently well. I don't think that they really did that good of a job against Guelph, but once again, if I'm going to say that there's a team that has the best O-line, they're not going to give up a lot of sacks. I don't know what the capabilities really are for this Carleton O-line against a Scott Brady-led defense that is schematically a nightmare to go up against. I like this matchup a lot because this really feels like a team looking in the mirror at each other, both offensively and defensively in a lot of cases here. The only thing that, as a Marauder fan, makes me a little nervous is the fact that the team that is leading the OUA in interceptions is also the Carleton Ravens with 9 in this. So this is a team that's obviously, once again, you start talking about iron sharpening iron and what are you seeing in practice every day? This Ravens squad, when you're doing one-on-ones and 12-on-12s, you're seeing the ball get thrown a fair bit here. So you're used to seeing a top passer throw against you. Now, obviously, I'm giving the edge to Keegan Hall over Elijah Barnes at this point in time here for sure. But still, they're going up against a top quality passer every single day in practice. Of course, that's going to make them better and better and get a little bit more used to the pass here. So both of these squads at 1-3, both of them in must-win scenarios here, both of them having outstanding passing attacks and either a player or a defense that are able to get after the quarterback here. The similarities are insane with both of these squads.
Yeah, and you know what? You're right to give credit to Max. I mean, obviously the defense as a whole, them getting after the quarterback, and you've said this a number of times, and I've been right there in alignment with you that it's, obviously we talk about your Drake Bodie's and your Josh Cumbers and these guys that are individually really stellar, but as a whole, that system's greater than the individual, the whole is greater than the parts or whatever. And, you have Greg Thomas tied in second in sacks in the OUA with 3. You have Malik Bolt tied for third or fourth, I guess, depending on how they look at it, with 2.5. Tom, you add those together, they still don't have enough to beat Onyeka. He's got 6. He's got 6. And also for Carleton, they have a guy in Patrick Lavoie on that offensive line. When you talk about they don't have the single guy, Mac doesn't have an offensive lineman where, again, if someone's starting to cause them trouble, again, you don't get the ability to move around offensive linemen that much, but from your backside, or I guess for Barnes, actually, I'm curious, have they moved Lavoie to right tackle because Barnes is a lefty? I'm curious if they've done that at all. That'd be kind of interesting, but one way or the other, whichever side you have him on, Patrick Lavoie, he's up there with the best tackles that we have in this game. And, it's fun. It's fun watching these two teams match up because I feel like we've been talking about them in a similar stratosphere for a few years. And I think in some ways they've been kind of trains passing in the night where Mac off of 2019 Yates, and then we missed the year for COVID, and then we're not making playoffs and all these things. And for Carleton, they're kind of building up through the Tanner DeYoung years, and the Coach Grant comes in, and we're liking what we're seeing. You go back 2 years to the last matchup that opened the season in Carleton, and it's a matchup with Andreas Duick and Tanner DeYoung doing battle, and Carleton wins that one. It's kind of a moot point as well because that's a game that Mac had to forfeit for. We don't have to get into all that. And just teams where it's just been their MO, where they pass the ball. And of course, with bringing up Coach Grant and Coach Potasic, who are so familiar with one another, and then Coach Hopkins calling up plays for Mac, used to be coaching up that O-line, the run game in Carleton. Again, a sneaky good, I don't know if it's a rivalry in the way we often use that word, but just two clubs that are they're just so familiar with one another, which may be why we're speaks to all these similarities that we're seeing. But either way, teams that are going to put up points, teams that are going to turn the ball over, that are getting after the quarterback. It's just really and given the implications, hey, to our Mac social media fans, go ahead and tag this one again. A must-watch OUA football matchup. It closes out, it doesn't close out the weekend entirely. It's another 4:00 game. But yeah, have your dial set to OUA TV Mac Carleton stream on this one. This is going to be stellar. Tom, what else do you have on this one? I'm so fired up for this one. Again, we wanted to talk about this a week and a half ago. What else do you want to say on this?
It's insane to me that we've got two teams at 3-1 in the Guelph Griffins and the Queens Golden Gales battling in what will be an amazing matchup. And I think that this game is going to be even more exciting between two squads that are 1-3 here, who are in desperation mode, who are now we have to save our season. If we want any hope of hosting a playoff game or even making it into the playoffs, we got to start turning the ship around and start getting some wins here. So I think both squads are kind of backed up into a corner, most definitely. Right now, offensively, I think if you're in the passing game, I'm giving the edge to McMaster. If you're in the run game, and while they might be a bit of a mute point, I'm giving it to Carleton. I think we've seen more consistency out of Matthew Moore against some of the teams that they played against. I think he's got something of a better run game here, certainly better than 24 yards. But anyways, but going into that defense, most definitely, I like everything that I'm seeing from this McMaster defense. I like Drake Bodie a lot. I really think highly of that young man. I think that he's going to do some great things in this game. Carter Blatt as well. This is a toss-up. This one is a real big toss-up for me, and this is something that I've been mulling over ever since we were talking about it last week. But I am going to give the edge to the Marauders in this one. I think that the teams are so well balanced here. I think going into this game, they are going to be hyper insanely focused on Onyeka and have something of a game plan there. That's not ultimately going to work all that well, but they're going to be aware of it, and they're only going to limit him to 2 sacks or maybe Maybe 2 sacks, maybe 3. But I do think that they go into this with some kind of a game plan with Onyeka, how to get Keegan either out and away from him, or how to max protect and give Keegan pressure or give Keegan time in order to throw the ball. I'm going with the Marauders on the road here.
Well, then we're on opposite sides of this one because I love Ottawa region football, and I think Carlton's stealing my heart away from their rivals in the GGs because you know what? Even if they can limit Onyeka, whatever that looks like, we keep seeing this guy, Chris Tupin, rack up tackles week in, week out. Xavier Malone flying all over the ball. Ottman Braun, and just the way that he contributes into this team in the secondary and returning kicks for them. Again, taking the way that they're so lined up equally, and you don't have to give Carlton the edge in the rush game. They take the edge in the rush game. It's not by a heck of a lot. It's not, mountains greater, but like they are, when you buy the numbers, the better rushing team. But when you weigh that against to the extent that that Mac pass the ball more, it makes the offenses so equal. And sure, I'm taking the lesser known of the two quarterbacks, though we've been so impressed. And this Mac defense, I mean, arguably for Carlton, you look at their schedule right now. Obviously, they had to take on Western in London. They played Guelph already. They had to deal with Windsor. They dealt with Windsor pretty formidably. They only put up 15 points, but they hold that rushing attack pretty nicely. You save that Windsor team and what Coach Donovan's doing. This is going to be one of the more creative defenses that they have to deal with. We've talked about that for a while now, and just all the things that just impress us about what Scott Brady does calling up their defense. Coach Brady. But give me Carlton. Give me Carlton in this one. They're riding hot off that game against U of T. It's make or break time. And, this is, again, must watch football, 4 o'clock from Carlton. Tom, we got one more game in this one. And, we talk about another matchup of teams where, again, maybe I need to dive into the history books. Wish there were more history books. Shout out to Coach Paul Gleason at Western. He actually has written a history book, though specifically just about the Western Mustangs. Is there something I'm missing in the annals of OUA history that make Windsor and Ottawa, the Ottawa GGs, that is a great rivalry? I don't know how historic it is, but as far as contemporary teams, I love this matchup, and that's what we're closing out week 5 with, when Ottawa is making that 800-plus kilometer drive to the end of the 401 under the shadows of the Golden Arches to face that team with the blue collar, the gold swagger, and Coach Don Cercelli overlooking every single thing they do in the Windsor Lancers. Tom, these are two impeccable defenses. Man, oh man, the similarities on these, it just runs so deep with these teams. Two impeccable defenses. You certainly give Windsor the edge, but we've looked at the numbers. Ottawa's no slouch. They passed the eye test and they passed the numbers test. You look at both these teams, they run the ball really well. Now, King Charles Asselin, a little banged up. We'll see how he's back. But also, Waby Mambo looked like he got a little nicked up in the York game. And two teams that halfway through this season, neither of us who've watched more OUA football than anyone else out there, I'm safe to say, know who's going to be starting at quarterback for these two clubs. Now, obviously, by reputation, Windsor, from what they did last year, and just on a number of facets, just like all the ways that defense can kill you, certainly have an edge, and they're home in this one. But the similarities run pretty deep with these two clubs. Tom, I don't have the slightest idea who's going out for quarterback for either of these two clubs. I think that's where the conversation has to start. We've talked about quarterback in pretty well all of these matchups. It's kind of important. What do you make of it in terms of who's going to be a pivot for these teams?
It's really, really difficult to kind of look into this because going into the Ottawa season, I think if everything is equal in both Jansen and Miracle playing their best football, I think Miracle is the guy you go with most definitely. But you have not seen Ben Miracle operate nearly as good as he did back in 2022, which is really what we are basing his performance off of because he was injured all of last year as well. If I'm the Ottawa GG's coaching staff, I'm going into this with Josh Jansen. And I'm
Mm.
giving this young man the time and the practice to give him a real legitimate chance to really get things going here. Because, like we were talking about previously, based off of all of the things that we saw watching that very first game of the season between Ottawa and Western here, we think that I think at least that Ben Miracle was supposed to be the starter in that game. He got a little dinged up. He wasn't able to go, so Josh Jansen had to get in trial by fire. But with that kind of mindset and that being the case, Josh Jansen is not getting as many first team reps as Ben Miracle is. And you and I both know how important the chemistry is between a quarterback and his receivers. And even with that offensive line with a snap count, people don't really think about the snap count all that much. But when you're used to a cadence like a go set hut, and then you have a quarterback who comes in and it's go set hut. You have O linemen that start leaning in their stance because they're waiting for something else, and then suddenly you get offsides. You get guys who aren't expecting it or whatever the case. So even something as small as a different snap count can matter. I think that Josh Jansen gets a little bit more of the capabilities here, and I would not be surprised to see him trot out there and be starting QB1. Similarly, I think Carson Roy is going to be the starting quarterback for Windsor for the exact same reason. I think that he has shown more upside here and certainly coming back and being a key pivotal part against the Carleton Ravens and then finally getting some touchdowns on the board for the offense. I think that Carson Roy and Josh Jansen are going to be the guys that we're going to be seeing for both of these squads coming out here. But certainly, I'm just basing that off of this is what I think. I've got zero info from either of these teams. They are both very tight-lipped on what's going on in that quarterback room.
We saw these teams match up last year, and it was a pretty exciting game, and it was a matchup of Danny Skelton versus Ryan Licandro.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I think that was the second or third game after Miracle went down, and it's on the back of Amilcar Polk that really Ottawa's staying in that game. And I think you have all the right reasons in the world to think that this could be a game that sees Josh Jansen get the start versus Carson Roy. But again, the last time we got to see Danny Skelton duke it out with Ben Miracle, we saw one of the best OUA football games in the last 5 years, which was the quarterfinal matchup between these two clubs in 2022. We keep referencing that was the last time we really saw Miracle. And of course, with JP Simonkinda, OUA MVP runner-up, at least by our estimations on the year, who goes for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. But just again, like Miracle is 15 for 20 in that game with just shy of 200 yards, a touchdown, an interception. That defense for Windsor was good then, as they're good now. And that hasn't changed with this club. And it's just, again, like when we talk about that consistency, it's not that he was, just a absolute gunslinger type quarterback out there, but with a good running attack, which they still have, and weapons in their passing a game. Yeah, you lose Nicolas Gendron, but they certainly still have those weapons. It's just he can fit into that system, be the stir that straws the drink, and everything like that to really, again, just bring it all together. But again, you might be totally right. It could be Roy. It could be Jansen. And, it's like with both these teams, from where they sit right now, I think on the year, again, it's they both are dealing with these quarterback problems. You remove, you kind of talk about everything but that. You certainly give the advantage to Windsor. You start to look at common opponents, what Windsor did against York and everything like that. In terms of the run game, though, you talked about giving Guelph the edge over what Windsor has in their dynamic trio. We see Wabi Mama get banged up a little bit. We see Charles Aslan get banged up a little bit. It feels like, again, it's weird to say put the quarterback conversation aside. It feels like with Windsor, even if the quarterback piece is a write-off, if you will, they're still figuring that out. Windsor has more things they can go to, more weapons in the air and on the ground that they can turn to, even with Aslan at full go. Or do we think that a fully healthy King Charles Aslan can really, get back in that dark horse MVP race with a stellar performance on the road against Windsor? Because that would be outstanding.
It's funny once again because we talked about the similarities between clubs here, and we already listed a number between these two. But when we were going into this, and certainly in my own head, I thought that Liam Talbot was going to be much more like a Charles Aslan to this Windsor offense, like Charles is now. Now, obviously, King Charles, I think, is doing his thing, because he's an outstanding athlete and he's one of the best, if not the best option that they have in the on that Ottawa offense in order to get the job done. And B, I think is a little bit out of necessity as
Yeah.
well because that quarterback game has not been there for these GGs. But certainly, I thought that Liam Talbot had the capabilities to do something very similar. Maybe not as a true running back, but certainly in that slot game to do those jet passes that we've seen, or to get a little bit more creative with what he could be doing. Now, he didn't play last week at all, was not on the dress roster, so might be dealing with an injury as well, which definitely means that they don't have a prime target. But like you said, they've got no shortage of those guys out there. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the history between these two clubs. Last year, they take care of business and they win 42-31 in Ottawa. Previous to that, it had been since 2012 since Windsor had actually beaten Ottawa.
Oh,
And even that was at home for Windsor. So that was the first time that Windsor had beaten Ottawa in Ottawa since before 2009, because that's all I got going as far back. So that was a massive victory for a program and just in general. Now, obviously, the Don Cercelli is looking at this like it's just another game. We don't need to worry about history and we're not being able to win in Ottawa. No, we're going in there and with that blue collar gold swagger, we're taking care of business in this one. Get me all fired up, Coach Don Cercelli. But I'm really interested to see who's going to be at quarterback, certainly, and how does that change who you get the ball to at a certain point? Does that completely take away the potential passing option that we've seen for Joey Zorn getting out into the flats or being that slot receiver? Do you start having them like we saw a little bit in that York game where you've got Wegby Mumbo in the backfield and Joey Zorn at a slot, and then they both come in, so they're both in the backfield, and you can option off of them, or that you can do something along those lines? How does that change up your game plan offensively depending on who your quarterback is? Because I don't think, regardless if it's Skelton or Corson Roy, that you're saying, okay, we're just going to sit back there 60 pro and launch bombs all day. I don't think that's going to be realistic for Windsor in this one. So how does your offense change as your quarterbacks come into play here? I think certainly, regardless of who, if it's Roy or Skelton, you're leaning on that trifecta of backs. Certainly between Joey Zorn and Christopher John. I believe it was Wemby Mumbo who went down with an injury in that game. So once again, prayers to the football gods that he's doing okay in this one. But you lean on that run game, you lean on that offensive line here, and you start to get a little creative with how you get the ball to your receivers. If Liam Talbot is back, that jet pass game is a very strong possibility for things here. But if you can match your defense, man, Windsor, the sky's the limit here, but I don't think that that's the possibility right now based off of where they are and just getting to where they need to be.
yeah, definitely. And I think, we've had this conversation with so many teams where you say, look, if Windsor just commits to running the ball, where we know Ottawa's defense is weaker in the full scheme of just what they do great. They're a really strong defense, made that much more so by how good the passing defense is. That, hey, look, you're at home. Ottawa's traveling a far distance to get there. Run the ball, tire them out. You've brought it up so many times, especially for the big guys with those long travels, how that can affect you, especially early in the game. Just pound the rock, take those body shots, and just know that down the line with how physical your defense plays, you'll pick up the win. And we've talked about, like, with Queens, how that philosophy, great, you pick up the win, but in the grand scheme of things, are you getting your quarterback the flow that they need to get? Obviously for Windsor, it's figuring out who the quarterback is. But regardless of that piece, I think for Windsor, that still has to be your plan of attack, regardless of whether you're saying, you know what, it's Corson Roy. Let's get him his game reps. Let's get him. I mean, he's had some good game reps now at this point in the year. Let's get him just that feeling that you are our guy. We're going with you, ride or die, this, that, and the third. But again, we've seen a guy in Patrick Cumberbatch, all Canadian Patrick Cumberbatch, outscore all Canadian defensive back Patrick Cumberbatch outscore his quarterbacks collectively over the last 2 weeks in not only turning the ball over and not just picking it off, going back to that Waterloo game where, again, he does the Ed Reed stripping it out of the dude's hands and just taking it the other way to the crib, where don't give. And that's not to mention his brother Eric. That's not to mention, all these guys back there that just make that secondary so stellar. Don't give that defense an opportunity where they are the most deadly and arguably more deadly than anyone else in the league, the opportunity to make you pay. I think if you're Windsor, you pound the rock, you chew up the clock, you keep the ball out of the air, and by that, you keep it out of the hands of guys like Denny Ferdinand and the like on that defensive end. And I think at this point, yeah, you got to figure out your quarterback situation. And they've had their bye week already, which, that's a tough thing. You don't have that extra time to be able to sort that out. But take care of business at home, run the ball. Know that your Devin Vriesiks, your Ethan Johns, your Claudia Moosins, your Istvan Asibo Datsis, your Robert Springers, your Jason Rashatzi. This defense is too good. You take care of business, you pick up the win, and you just say, hey, look, what we are good at, arguably no one's better at. And no one's perfect at this game of football. So let's just be great at these things and know that by doing that, I mean, hey, look, is there is there a quarterback that wouldn't want to play on a team with one of the best defenses in the country, one of the best running attacks in the country? And oh yeah, when you do get the ball, you get to throw it to guys like Colby Ginn, Javoni Cunningham, Jalen Miller, occasionally Joey Zorn in the slot, and of course Liam Talbot. Just do what you do best, and the passing game, I think, will take care of itself as a result of it. Give me Windsor at home under the golden arches, blue collar gold swagger all day.
Yeah, I'm not picking against the Don Cercelli.
Yeah.
We're going with Windsor. Give me that blue collar gold swagger. I think they take care of business here. And I would not be surprised if whoever's in at quarterback, we start to see them get some success. And then we start to see a little bit of a more positive box score at the end of this, rather than the half positive, half kind of negative, kind of middle of the pack that we've seen here. I think that the quarterback, whoever's in there, is going to do some good things here. It's going to be surprising because we talked about that Ottawa GG's defensive secondary being one of the best in the country. But once again, they're not going to see that success by just launching the ball down the field, because that's where the brothers Cumberbatch, Denny Ferdinand, and the rest of those guys do their best work. I think that you really see the success here in the short game, in the screen game, and getting the ball out to your outstanding offensive weapons and just get them some space and let them do their thing, coupled with Joey Zorn and Christopher John making you pay for trying to tackle them throughout this. Give me Windsor. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think it's to your point, I think that's a great point of just what success looks for whomever the quarterback is. I think a really successful day is like you go 11 or 12 for 16, 120 yards, maybe a touchdown, or, you know what I mean? Like it's a game like that where you might still win by 2 scores, 17 points, something like that. You crushed it on the ground. Your defense went nuts. And again, you did your job to pick up the win. Man, we talk about the Don, but hey, with him, Coach Belfay on the other side, just so much coach swag in this game that, man, oh man, we talk about the testosterone in that Waterloo locker room with Coach Bertoya and Coach McNeil, just these opposite sidelines. It's gonna be something to take in. Yeah, great matchup though, and again, been so great seeing these teams tee off against one another over the years. And we have Windsor sitting at 3-0, we have Ottawa sitting at 2-2. So it's certainly not an impossibility that Ottawa pulls up the upset, but an upset it would certainly be, at least in our books. Tom, that's our preview for week 5. We are across the threshold of the midway point of this season. Again, we have Western on the bye week. We have the rivalry games in Waterloo. We have the rivalry game with the Red and Blue Bowl battle, Toronto Argo Cup, Matt Dean's Bowl, whatever you want to call it. And again, some other matchups that we queued up throughout the OUA with major implications for these teams, both in terms of who are some of the top dogs in this league, and again, people vying for playoff seedings, and perhaps even greater things. Tom, final remarks going into week 5.
Potentially the best week that we've had top to bottom with all of the matchups that are going on here so far in the OUA. What storylines, what similarities between these teams, between all of the squads that we've detailed and all of the positional battles and everything. It's just a crazy time for OUA football. But my God, I can't wait for this. Despite the fact that I will be out and I will not be at these games, I'm going to find whatever hotspot I can because I'm watching these ones while I'm out on the road.
And I just love the fact that, and you might be right, that these are the best matchups we've had thus far. And it's the best week of matchups, and that means there's no Western in the mix. So that's always a bit of a feather in the cap of OUA fans who didn't play for the Western Mustangs. Tom, though you'll be out in the woods, hopefully staying safe and tuning in on whatever hotspot you get, I will be live and direct from Varsity Stadium, checking out the Toronto Bowl, the Battle of Toronto, Argo Bowl, Red and Blue Bowl, whatever you want to call it. Come say what's up if you're there. If I don't see you there, you'll see me and Tom right here reviewing Week 5 at the 55.